Hello my fellow kin, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another unit analysis video. On today's agenda we'll be taking a look at the most recent addition to our roster, the Hernkyn Yaegirs. As always, we'll take a look at who they actually are, find out how to best equip them, how to best use them, discuss some stratagems and combos, and of course wrap the video up with some important considerations to keep in mind for when you decide to run this unit. And you basically always will. But before we go any further, I want to give a massive thank you to our channel members, Jordan Stuckenschneider, Saturn ASMR, and The Pulp. Thank you for your ongoing support to the channel and helping me bring you guys new content each week. If you're interested in becoming a channel member, you can find out more by clicking the link down in the description below. So who are the Hernkyn Yaegirs? Well, in the lore, these guys represent the foot-slogging frontiersmen of the kin who go out ahead of everybody else, kind of scout the perimeter out, deep deployment, reconnaissance, and gather intel. They're really forward operatives and provide a really good utility role among the kin, both in the lore and on the table. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the Leagues of Votann, talk tactics, share photos, and even get your models featured in my videos, consider joining our Discord server free of charge using the link down in the description below. Now on the tabletop, these guys' representation is actually fairly accurate to the lore, and I put their data card up here on the screen for you all to see. They come in on movement speed 6, toughness 5, 5 up base save, 1 wound, leadership 7, and OC 1. They also come in unit sizes of 10 and it is fixed, so you can't take them 5s and you cannot combat squad them into smaller units. It is always a default of 10 models per unit. Now at first you might notice that these guys have quite a pitiful save characteristic at a base save of 5+ and only being 1 wound, meaning they basically die to anything, but that doesn't matter. We don't care. These guys are amazing. And why is that? Well, if we look at their abilities, it is very simple. They have the infiltrator keyword, which means they get to deploy at the beginning of the game basically anywhere. You pick a spot in no man's land, as long as you're 9 inches away from any other unit and 9 inches away from the enemy deployment zone, you're good to go. And this provides an insane amount of innate value to Votann as a whole outside of the core game, because in the core game itself, infiltrate is an amazing keyword to have and an amazing ability to bring to any list composition. But for Votann particularly, it is something that has been long requested, and we do finally have it on a unit, which is fantastic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and why it's so good and how you can get the most amount of value out of this ability later on in the video. The second ability that these guys have is Pragmatic Hunters, and this is basically just a reactive move. So if something ends a move within 9 inches of your unit, you get to reactively move by rolling a d6 dice, and whatever the result on that dice is, that is the amount of movement that you get reactively in your opponent's turn. So this is also pretty interesting because for the first time ever, we have something that allows us to have some shenanigans. We could do something now that allows us to be a little bit more tricksy and not quite as honest as we're often coined. In terms of loadout, we have a few interesting choices. So for weapons, we have the basic choice between taking knives or taking shotguns. And so the knives here have assault, they're 18-inch range, 2 attacks, BS4, strength 5, 0 AP, 1 damage. The other option are knives, and these come in at 2 attacks, weapon skill 4, strength 4, minus 2 AP, and 1 damage. You also have bolt revolvers, which are included with the plasma knife, so you effectively still get the shotgun at half range, half the number of shots, but with the addition of plasma knives. There are 2 other additional weapon choices that you have that are optional, so you could sub either a shotgun out or the plasma knife set out and take either an APM launcher or a Magna coil rifle respectively. So you could bring both of these in as long as you make room for it by replacing the loadouts on 2 of your other models. Worth mentioning that the entire unit has to take the same set of weapon options, being either plasma knives and the bolt revolver or just the bolt shotgun. So in theory, you could have a unit of 10, all equipped with plasma knives, or you could have a unit of 8, which are all equipped with plasma knives, and 2 of the models in that unit are instead going to have the APM launcher and the Magna coil rifle. So quite a flexible loadout, but we do tend to typically see one prominent loadout taken across the competitive scene, and again, we'll look at that and why that is in just a moment. And so all of this, 10 models, 10 wounds, infiltrate, reactive move, comes in at a whopping low cost of just 80 points, which is really, really good. Now, we're going to do something a little bit different today. And instead of talking about the math and the loadout first, I want to actually jump into how this unit is actually intended to be used on the table and how you get the most amount of value out of them, because I think it's going to be important as to highlighting some of the rationale behind the weapon choices and saving us a lot of time on doing the math. So how do you use these guys effectively? I identified 4 main categories that I would say are probably the best use case for including Jaegers into your list. And the first one is for breathing room. Breathing room allows you to block your opponent's infiltrators or scout moves from getting a presence on the table, and it also allows your scout moves to activate, meaning that people can't deny you the ability to scout by putting an infiltrator somewhere, which is something that we had to deal with for quite a long time. The second use case is for the natural expansion. And so the natural expansion is identifying an objective marker on the map that just makes the most amount of sense for you to go to. It's kind of like considered your advantageous objective to get to. And usually ruins are going to be positioned to provide you with more cover, and it's going to be a lot easier for you to defend that point than your opponent. So having the Jaegers means you basically guarantee access to that expansion point and deny your opponent the ability to get there and try to block you from accessing it early in the game. It also allows you to do more economic trading, because now if your opponent wants to come out and deny you that foothold in your natural expansion, they're probably going to have to expose themselves a little bit and begin initiating the trade war while you have 10 wounds across 10 models safely stored behind a ruin. So it's going to take a few activations to get through all of it, and they're going to have to bring themselves into a vulnerable position to do so, giving you an advantage in the early trades. The third use case is utility. So obviously everything I said is utility in itself, but by utility here I'm specifying move blocking, tagging, baiting, and using grenades. And again, we're going to look at some examples here, so I'm going to call out how some of these things might be incorporated when we look at how to use it for breathing room and natural expansion, and how utility is kind of just naturally baked into this kit. The last thing you could use these for are secondary scoring, and again, this kind of just naturally occurs. It's innate to the data card because you get to infiltrate them, you get to try to screen, you get to put them somewhere on the mission table that is not in your deployment zone and not in your enemies, which means you basically get access to some turn 1 secondary draws without having to commit anything else to do them, such as area denial if you have these guys somewhere in the middle screening, or containment if you're near your expansion objective, which is within 9 inches of the edge. It allows you to just basically get an early advantage. I put kinda not applicable because it's not their primary use, but it does kind of just naturally happen if it comes up. Okay, so the first example we're going to look at here is breathing room. So I have 2 layouts on the screen for you. I have map 7 medium hammer and anvil for WTC on the left, and then I took terrain layout 2, which I put here on the right. And we're just, I'm not sure if terrain layout 2 is affiliated with hammer and anvil deployment. I think it might be tipping point, but similar idea is that we're deploying on the left hand side and our opponent is deploying on the right hand side. And so this is a very classic example of breathing room. I got a lot of comments on my video interviewing Jordan Stuckenschneider regarding his use of infiltrators in Votann, and people weren't quite sure what we were referring to when we said bow ties. Bow ties is, in this case, lining everything up straight down the middle between both of your deployment zones in such a way that you effectively block out all of no man's land, or 99% of it, from your opponent being able to infiltrate or scout into, which is really powerful because people are paying points for these abilities. And if you deny them that early pressure on the board, or that early utility, or that early screening, this could be really impactful. So back to the example we see here for the WTC terrain first, I put the Jaegers in green. It's not exactly measured precisely, but this is an approximate idea of what you can expect. We basically line up the whole squad of Jaegers somewhat down the middle, close to the enemy's deployment zone, legally 9 inches away. And in order to keep coherency, because we're above 6 models, we simply tie a knot at both ends. So what that means is, if you see there's a little line that kind of slashes off to the side, we put one model at the tip of that within 2 inches of the furthest, most extreme model in the line, and the one that is next in line. So effectively we have a 3-point cohesion at both ends of our bow tie, making a bow tie shape, of course. And so what this allows you to do is get the most maximum amount of range you can out of deploying your unit. Now, there is a negative to this, of course. If you do get shot and you lose just 1 or 2 models, you do break coherency and you will lose models, but that doesn't really matter. You are paying 80 points to put this unit here and say no to your opponent. You don't get to play the game. You don't get to do the things you want to do. I am stopping you from interacting with the board in the deployment step and first turn of the game for scouts. So it's very powerful to do this because not only do you stop your opponent from moving out before the game begins, but you also ensure that on your end, your opponent can't interact with blocking your units from scouting forward, because now there's nowhere to go. They can't possibly fall between 9 inches of your deployment zone and 9 inches of your Jaegers, which means they can't go anywhere in no man's land. Again, this just ensures that your scout units like the bikes, the Sagittars, all get to push up at the beginning of the game and all get to make use of their scout moves unimpeded by the enemy. It's the exact same concept when we look at the GW Pride Nexus terrain layout here on the right. Same idea, this is just an approximation, but as you can see, we're kind of just stretching that line out as far as we can, keeping coherency with 2-inch gaps, and then tying a knot at both ends with an added unit sticking out, making like a tri-point hold. Now, the second thing I want to show you is the natural expansion use. The natural expansion use is a little more defensive, so rather than just stringing it up down the middle, which you typically would do if you're playing against something that has scouts or something that has a lot of infiltrators, in order to deny them that movement and board presence early on, here you're going for more of a defensive expansion route, which means you pick the objective marker that screams to you to be the most natural place for you to go to next. And again, here, hammer and anvil on the left. So that for us would be the bottom-most objective marker. It's protected by the ruin. The L shape is pointed towards our enemy, which means it's a lot harder for them to get angles onto our objective, versus if we went to the top one and we put our Jaegers there instead, well, your opponent could probably just sit in his deployment zone and still shoot you. This way, however, if we put them south, which is our natural expansion point, it's a lot more protected. It gives us an advantage. It forces your opponent to move out of their deployment zone, to move in a vulnerable position in order to clear these Jaegers off the objective. In turn, this means that you can freely shoot them out of the way because they'll probably have to expose themselves in a vulnerable position to do so and at least kill all the Jaegers, meaning that you get to freely trade away this 80-point unit for a couple of their activations instead. And again, same thing here on the GW terrain, except I think this terrain layout too for tipping point is a bit different with the objective marker placement. It's somewhere off to the right hand side. But again, by putting our Jaegers here, this might not look like our natural expansion, but it does accomplish 2 goals. We are contesting this objective because now on our turn, we have 10 OC that could simply walk out and stand on it. So if they decide to put something on this objective that is weaker, like a scout unit, which we might see later on in the video with an example, we can contest it, we can tie it up, we can just try to bog it down and out OC them. So it does give them something to think about. Even a 5-man intercessor unit or a 5-man battle line, for example, that has OC2, if we walk out onto that objective and kill one thing, then we out OC them. So it just helps to apply a little bit of pressure at a position that gives us defense, and the only way our opponent can deal with this threat is if they expose themselves and overextend. Now, as for the utility that I said I would talk about a little bit here, so natively, as you can see, this is what I meant by there is value simply including an infiltrating unit because you'd get to do all of these cool things. But some other considerations you might want to keep in mind is potentially if you get first turn, simply advancing and running out as close as you can to the enemy's deployment zone. Remember, you're probably going to be just 9 inches away because, of course, you can only infiltrate 9 inches away, which means with a 6-inch move, you get up to 3 inches away from their DC. If you roll an advance roll, on average, you roll a 3. That means you're going to be right at the line of their deployment zone. So you could potentially move block some vehicles from getting line of sight, which is something that really does come up. Or it could help you just get into their lines if you want to charge something instead of advancing. This could also be a valid choice. I'll just jump back to the slide for breathing room to show you another example, as this happened in one of my games. I was trying to deploy in such a way here that I was stopping my opponent from getting a turn 1 move and charge onto the objective while also denying him movement by trying to block out his avenues to pass vehicles and pass infantry through. He would have to simply walk around the Jaegers instead. So I positioned them here basically where you see on the screen, and then they got first turn. So what did they do? They walked some Terminators from their deployment zone up 5 inches and that triggered my reactive move. In response, I got to reactive move my Jaegers, and unfortunately I just rolled a 1, so my plan kind of failed. But potentially, as long as I rolled average and I rolled a 3, it would have allowed me to move so far off of the objective towards them that would have denied them the ability to charge me and get onto the objective with their 3-inch consolidation. So you can effectively bait people to get out of position and also stall units as well. Now, with regards to baiting people, let's say you did want to charge the Terminators onto the Jaegers that were standing here in this green line, and I actually wanted him to do that because I had some really nasty Hecatons that were lined up at that blue ruin at the bottom corner, ready to shoot. So what I would probably do in that case is if he does the 5-inch move to get close to me, and I would reactive move in such a way that it pulls my Jaegers closer to the middle on the center point of the objective. Sure, my opponent can charge me now still and get right on the objective instead of me blocking them closer to their deployment zone, but maybe I don't care because I want to draw that 5-man unit out so that I can shoot it to death on my turn safely from the bottom of the map, while of course getting line of sight because now they were drawn out of position to get on the objective. So ultimately, as you can see, there are a ton of different things you could do. If you guys are interested in learning a little bit more about this, maybe I can make a video that goes into a little bit more detail as to some of the tactics you can do when you're deploying. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I can try to work something out. Now, all that said, a lot of people seem to be struggling to actually find Jaeger models in stock, which is really unfortunate because they were pretty difficult to acquire on release. But this is probably a good opportunity to plug the sponsor of today's video, Card Brawlers, a local gaming store that I frequent every time I visit Montreal, located near Jean Talon Metro. Card Brawlers has an incredibly stocked inventory of basically everything you need for Warhammer, even their Leagues of Votann range, which does include at this time in the video recording the Kill Team Termination box set, which does include Jaegers inside. So if you're interested in checking them out, they have great prices, great stock. I'll leave a link for you down in the video description below, and consider using my affiliate link at no extra charge to yourself, allowing me to get a very small kickback for referring you to the store. Alright, so all of this said with regards to how we want to play Jaegers, what is our logical choice for primary loadout? Is it going to be the shotgun or is it going to be the knives? And I think that this unit screams knives to me. Few reasons for that. We want to be up close and personal. We want to get in our enemy deployment's face. We want them to come to us if they're trying to stop us from our natural expansion point, or if we want to contest them on theirs. Because of that, we're probably going to be charging a lot. We're probably going to be very close to other skirmishers early in the game. And as a result of that, I think the extra AP, the extra melee attacks, is just significantly better than having 2 shots on a 0 AP 1 damage weapon. You also still get the bolt revolver if you take the plasma knives, which means you're only really losing 1 attack on the shotgun, which is the exact same profile as the bolt revolver. So you're getting extra attacks in melee, which are quite powerful, as we'll see in a little bit, which is significant enough to actually challenge some of those other skirmishing units other armies might be taking. Now, as for the APM and the sniper, this is where the math might actually get involved. However, with the APM, just objectively looking at it, it's a single shot at 24-inch range, BS4, strength 6, minus 2 AP, and D6 damage. This unit at 80 points brings significant value just in its ability to infiltrate 10 models. So just by doing that, you're basically getting 80 points worth of value out of this unit. Anything more is just extra. It's great. So why not take this one single APM launcher shot, anti-vehicle 3, anti-monster 3, D6 damage. You might actually do something. Even if you get 3 wounds that go through, great, that's awesome. Added value. So in my opinion, I think you still take the APM launcher just philosophically. We don't even have to do math. It's just you're trading 1 set of weapons away for an APM launcher that could potentially spike and do some significant chip damage to a vehicle or monster. So I think that's great value on an already very useful unit. So why not just take that? Now the sniper itself is where I will actually showcase some of the math, because I think this is actually widely debated, at least in our Discord server, which you could join free of charge using the link down in the description below. And in order to do that, I first want to show you the damage output you can expect to get with the plasma knives. Okay, so on the screen here, I have 2 examples, 2 charts. I have no tokens in green and 2 tokens in purple. So this is for 16 plasma knives, assuming that one of your models is going to be taking an APM launcher, and assuming one of the models is going to be taking a sniper. So we're just looking at the total amount of knives that are left over, the knife attacks. 8 models will have knives, meaning that there will be 16 attacks total being allocated to our targets. So I put these here for other skirmisher brackets being less than toughness 4 or the toughness 4 level. And of course, since it's been a while since we had one of these math videos, the number in black simply represents the total amount of unsaved wounds that go through to our target based on the number of failed saves they made, and then the damage characteristic, which is colored underneath it, represents the total amount of damage that goes through based on those unsaved wounds. In this case, because the damage of the weapon is 1, it's simply the unsaved wounds multiplied by 1, which is the same number. Okay, so let's look at something that is a typical skirmishing body at toughness 4 with a 3-up base save, like these scouts, for example. So if we take a look at these guys here, they come in at toughness 4, 3-up base save. If we have no tokens and we're attacking this with 16 knives, we actually only wind up doing 2.67 damage, which is just enough to kill one and maybe take another one down to 1 wound. Conversely, if we have these guys double judged, which you might be inclined to do if you were trying to maybe get an early set of judgment tokens going in your economy, so you put 2 tokens out on these guys at the start of the game, and then you rush your Jaegers in to kill them, and just quickly get you 3 CP, which I know some people might tend to do. I am not entirely sure that is a good use of the Jaegers, as we'll see in a little bit when we take a look at the math in more detail. But for now, let's just assume you're trying to do that, so you are charging something that has 2 tokens like these scouts. What we end up doing is about double the amount of damage here, so we're looking at 4.74, which means we'll pick up 2 models and leave 1 on 1 wound. It's not terrible, but it still doesn't quite kill the unit. Now let's say you were inclined to pop Warrior's Pride, which is one of our stratagems that would augment your AP based on the number of tokens the unit has. In this case, augmenting your weapons to AP 4. I know there was a lot of discussion on Reddit about the effectiveness of using this stratagem, so let's see if it has any merit on the Jaegers. Well, what we see at the bottom right corner here is now the total amount of unsaved wounds that would go through, as your opponent would no longer get a saving throw in this case, is only 7.11 on a toughness 4 target. So we do reliably 3 extra wounds to the scout squad, but what this actually looks like is 3.5 models dying. So there's still 3 wounds left before we can guarantee kill this unit and get our tokens. Now on the next slide here, I saved you the time of looking at the table. I just ran the math, and what we see is that if we were to shoot all 8 of our pistols, so all the models equipped with a pistol, if we were to shoot them into our targets before charging them, we would inflict on average 1.48 wounds into the scouts. So if we add all this together and we popped Warrior's Pride, we would have about 8.5 damage total that would go through here on these guys, meaning that we would reliably leave alive on average 1.5 models. So 1.5 scouts would still be alive at the end of this. Now this begs the question, because we know we're taking the APM launcher for that added value to shoot into a vehicle or monster, but what about that sniper? If we include a sniper as the 9th weapon inside of our unit, does that mean we will be able to reliably pick up the scout squad, or are we better off just taking the extra set of knives and a pistol to help finish off the unit? Let's find out. So on the screen here, I did the math. I have 1 set of 2 knives in green, and I have 1 single sniper shot in blue. And what we see is that shooting at the toughness 4 scouts with a 3-up base save, assuming they're double judged still, we would do 0.59 damage with 1 set of 2 knives. Conversely, with the sniper, we could expect to do 0.56 damage in shooting, so fairly comparable. The only difference would be that with the knife, we would also get access to a pistol, which would provide us with 0.19 extra damage on average from the single shot. So what does this all mean? Well, if we add the numbers up together for both of these simulations, we see that with Warrior's Pride active, so paying a CP to get these guys up from AP2 to AP4 and assuming that you're running 8 knives and 1 sniper, excluding the APM, that means that on average with this loadout, we'll get around 9.15 damage that goes through into a unit of scouts. Conversely, if we run 9 knives and 0 sniper, we're looking at 9.37 damage. So it's still very comparable, and it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But what's really important here is that on average, we don't actually kill a squad of scouts by rushing these guys in into melee, shooting them with our pistols first, charging, and then popping Warrior's Pride. So on average, you don't actually kill the Scout Squad, which is pretty significant because that means even if your opponent rolls just like totally average, or if they get a little bit lucky, you definitely wasted your CP. And if you were just playing with the Jaegers to accomplish this goal, well, now you wasted 80 points of the unit as well. Additionally, you also used 2 of your precious judgment tokens at the start of the game, which means it's one less big threat without a token. I do also acknowledge that the sniper and APM models both have 1 attack each, and weapon skill 4, strength 4, 0 AP, 1 damage with their close combat weapon, but this is not going to impact the numbers significantly or push you well above the average breaking point to kill a full Scout Squad. Alright, so let's put all of this together and do a little summary. I do think, in my opinion, that the knives are a standout pick over the shotguns. AP0 leaves a lot to be desired. I probably wouldn't even bother shooting the guns at all unless they were going into something like gaunts or gargoyles. But I do think the knives actually do have some better play here, particularly into things that have weaker save characteristics. So a scout is, what you would probably see as a typical infiltrating unit data card. But it is quite durable, and there are units that are maybe a little bit weaker, like flayed ones, for example, in which case you definitely do pick up the squad if you're equipped with knives. So that could be a viable strategy if you're playing as Necrons and you do run flayed ones and are a little bit too aggressive with how they deployed them, and you think you could get a turn 1 charge with your Jaegers. Maybe you just pop the 2 judgment tokens on them and you'll be able to reliably pick them up, unlike with the shotguns. So I think the knives are better. It's just, it fits the kit. It's what you want your unit to be doing anyway. You're a utility piece. You're not here to actually kill stuff. You want to be up close and personal, and I think the knives just help complement that overall playstyle. You also just get better use out of having AP, as AP is always good. In terms of special weapons, the APM launcher for me is an added bonus. I think you always include this just because you already have native utility, and anything else you can accomplish in terms of damage output is just the icing on top. In terms of the sniper, this is probably the weaker choice. I would say it's completely optional to include this. Ironically enough, you're never going to actually be shooting this at a character. You should instead probably just be using this to shoot at whatever unit you're trying to kill in melee. Any other skirmisher, for example, like the scouts. You could also just like chip 2 wounds off of something that, maybe you get lucky and you pop into a vehicle and you just pick up the last 2 wounds, which could always be nice. Ultimately, the sniper option doesn't really matter all that much. It's kind of insignificant. So this would probably just be included, in my opinion, if you wanted to have, again, that like added potential for the same reason you would take the APM if you want to chip off 2 wounds off of something. Okay, let's quickly talk about stratagems. So there's only 2 stratagems I would probably ever consider using on this unit, and that would be grenade being the number 1 choice because they do have the grenade keyword, which is pretty cool actually. It allows you to be even more annoying because you could probably get some added value out of this unit if you're up close and personal in someone's ranks. It would allow you to potentially spike and guarantee pick up a unit that you're trying to charge maybe to get the judgment tokens, or severely wound or finish off a target like a vehicle that's probably sitting at like 2 or 3 wounds left after you shot the rest of your army into it. Warrior's Pride, for the reasons we discussed a little bit earlier, where it does give you that extra punch, but I still don't think it's worth it unless you're really going into something that you are positive you will kill, and the Warrior's Pride is just committing that extra CP to ensure that you're going to be picking up your bonus CP early in the game. So some quick considerations in summary. I think these guys are really good for securing an early game advantage. Do not worry about their damage output. If they do damage, great, that's just extra value, but they're not here for that. As long as you can either infiltrate them in a way that you're denying your opponent the ability to do so, or you're infiltrating them in a way that threatens your opponent's expansion or guarantees yours, you already got your 80 points value out of this thing because nothing else in your army can do this for you. And it's like really dirt cheap at 80 points, so you don't have to be afraid of this thing dying. It's just there to guarantee you this early stage. Another consideration I would say is do keep in mind that the reactive move is pretty tricksy. So you can do some pretty cool plays with this, like reactive moving to draw things out and pull them onto an objective that's more open for a firing lane, or also just advancing forward in such a manner that blocks your opponent's movement on another unit. This could really help stop them from getting an angle on a firing lane, which again, amazing value compounded onto an already great unit. I will say though, a word of caution, just always assume you're going to roll a 1 on the dice for the reactive move. I think it's helpful to keep in mind just play safe and pretend you're going to roll the worst possible number. Because if you try to build some kind of play around rolling a 5 or a 6, which would be really awesome if you did, it just probably won't happen. Just like what happened to me in one of my earlier games of trying out the unit, where I tried to do this really cool move block onto the Terminators, only ended up moving 1 inch behind the wall, and then they charged and killed my unit and still consolidated onto the objective. So it was just kind of a wasted move. The last thing I'll say is I'm not entirely convinced you need more than 1 in a list. I have a few games now in with the unit, and I never really felt like I needed more than 1. If you look at a lot of the top competitive lists as well, they're usually just taking 1. And I think maybe a big consideration to that is that people are struggling to find them in stock. There's no real way to acquire them unless you 3D print or get a proxy going. But for the most part, I think you're safe with just 1 in a list. It's a large enough footprint that you can basically do anything you want to if you get to deploy first. So I wouldn't be too worried about not having a super competitive list if you only have 1 available. And if you have none, then I would highly recommend trying to get some, because it is a big game changer to the army. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm still recovering from a cold, so I'm sorry if I'm sounding a little bit groggy, but I just want to thank you all for tuning in today. If you haven't already, please do subscribe, like the video, leave a comment for me down below. What do you think about the Jaegers? What do you think about some of the tactics I discussed? How have you been using them in your games? Once again, a quick shout out to our channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And if you want to check out Card Brawlers, the local gaming store, which at this time does have Jaegers in stock, please consider doing so and using my affiliate link down in the description below so you could help fund my plastic addiction. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all hopefully in the live stream this Wednesday, where we look at the Nova reveals together in a live video. It's going to be a watch party, and I'm kind of anticipating something big for Votann. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.